Welcome, everybody. We got Jason Moy and everybody. Let's do this. Let's open it up for everybody. Say, hey, where are you from? And put it in the chat. And please address your major concern. I'm going to download this right now for the latest from Zoom. Literally doing this on the fly. So who are you? Where are you from? And what is your biggest concern about what's happening? We have over 170 guys that are registered, so we'll see what happens here. All right, a lot of the concerns we have: definition of what essential personnel means, risk transfer, risk mitigation for contractors and subcontractors, big deal, right? How long do you predict this shutdown will last? Ooh, I don't know about all that, but tracking expenses related to shutdown. Will payment of unpaid invoices be delayed? Site visits on federal properties, extending length of task order period, performance costs associated with shutdown. Any open and pending RFPs, what happens with those? We're going to go back to these in a minute, but if you have anything that you would like to know, pop that into the chat and let us know what you would like to know. Payment for contractors on existing contracts, it's a big deal. Maintenance contracts on military bases, will they stop temporarily? Great question. Who was that? That was Nancy. All right. What do you do with GSA schedule orders? Orders that are scheduled to be delivered. Great questions, everybody. All right. Okay, guys. Well, we're going to get right at it. I really appreciate you guys being here today. And I'll pop some things on that we can do in a few minutes. Before we get started, a real quick disclaimer. We're not GSA. We're not any other agency. It's for informational purposes only, not legal advice, even though we have a lawyer in the house named Jason Moy. He's here. And Govies, any Govies that are here, voluntary, not endorsement of purchase from anybody, and general information from you if you say anything. And we're going to say this over and over. Contractors, if you have business right now, you should be contacting your respective contracting officers for specific instructions. Everybody agree with that?
Absolutely.
Oh,
yes.
All right. The main characters of today will be Jason Moy. He is with Contractors. I'll introduce him in just a minute. Peter Timbus with TFN Action Capital, and me, myself, and I as CEO of ISI Federal. So let's get to know each other and let's see what everybody says. How long you been in business? And then what do you sell? And have you ever been to a Gov Brief session before? So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to introduce myself real quick so that you know who I am. I am the CEO of ISI Federal. We do federal marketing. We have intelligence. We have advanced monitoring platforms that we provide to folks like you. We also run Gov Brief with interagency briefings, industry briefings, and special briefings, kind of like what we're doing right here. I am a superstar, everybody, just so you know. I am approaching Taylor Swift kind of status on YouTube. I just crested 100 subscribers at Federal Playbook. So, and I also host the Monday roundtables. So if you really want to make me happy, go to @Federal Playbook and subscribe. And with us, we have Jason Moy. He tell us a little bit about Contractors and what you do there.
Yeah, so Contractors is a boutique government contracting firm. We've been around for a few decades, as you can see, and we really specialize in bid protests, contract claims, and working with primes and subs to come up with teaming agreements, JVs, and all the necessary kind of contract documents you might need. And if it touches government contracting, we've done it and we do it. So for example, we have a national security practice for personnel and facilities clearances. We work with employment law for issues, obviously with contractor employees, creating businesses, helping with compliance with particular socioeconomic statuses under the Small Business Administration. And then frankly, anything that touches government contracting, we've done it. So we're here to help. And we like to say that even though we're a small firm, we have a small firm value, meaning we don't charge as much as the big guys down on K Street in DC, but we give you the same results.
And I will attest to that. All of that is true. And I promise you, Jason gets busy, but if you ask him a question, he will help you. And if you want him engaging with him, well, that's a little different. But I'm telling you, he's one of the good guys, and he's my favorite lawyer. Just gonna say.
I appreciate it, Dave.
So, and he's not the only lawyer I know, just in case you were wondering. All right. So we also have Peter Timbus. Now, I want to make sure you know who Peter is, because a lot of what you're going to be worried about is something that lands right in the lap of Peter Timbus. Peter, tell us a little bit about TFN Action Capital and what you guys do.
I did my first funding government contractor in 1990. So we've been financing government contractors for 33 years, and we're a little bit different that we're an alternative lender. So we can do a lot of things that traditional banks cannot do. And one of the things that we do is we don't lend to your financial statements, we'll lend to the opportunity. So if you've got an award or a potential award, we're going to establish our access to capital on that award. And what's very powerful in that is that a lot of our clients will fund their payrolls prior to them invoicing the federal government. And I've been through a few of these shutdowns in the past, and as long as you've got a funded contract or appropriations, your invoice will be accepted, but there's going to be no one there to process them, and we'll continue to fund them however long they're outstanding. They're outstanding 120 days, 180 days, which has happened in the past, especially back in 2013. We continue to fund our clients while the traditional banking system did not. So we're like the Motel 6 of the banking industry, that we're always going to keep the light on for you.
I love it, man. So we're going to be relying on you, Peter, in a few minutes to help. We also have the good Dr. Rafael Marrero. He'll stop in. He's a best-selling author of La Salsa Secreta. I'm surprised I even got that out right, as anybody that knows me. And we also have Sally White with Echo Wolf Solutions to throw in, because she's out there a lot of times hobnobbing with some of the big folks out there. So I want to make sure, welcome to you, Sally White.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we will get there. So let's end this poll real quick, and we'll share the results with everybody. A lot of folks been around here for a while. A lot of folks have been here before. Thanks and welcome back. Glad that we're doing this for you. This is why we're doing this, so that we can help you get to where you want to go, and try to manage this. So I appreciate what you're putting in there. Let us know who you are. And now I have the personal question. How are you doing? So this is where, I mean, between the media and the real life, right? So are you in a full down meltdown panic? Are you on the ledge? You're not sure what to think. Maybe you're a little concerned, or maybe you are just cool. So we'll try to keep everybody off of the ledge. There's a couple folks I'm sure that'll wind up there. And then, do you have any business as a prime, as a sub? And I think you can choose multiples on there, because that'll give us an idea of what's happening. All right. While folks are filling that out, Jason, tell us about what's happening and why it happens first.
Yeah. So, everyone uses the term government shutdown, but really what you're looking at here is a lapse in appropriations. And you can go to the Constitution. It talks about, hey, how the Congress is supposed to fund the government. And there's also another act that's important here. And some people may have heard of this, some people may not, but it's called the Anti-Deficiency Act. And that means that the government can't spend money unless Congress has appropriated it. So really, what's happening right now is that in Congress, they haven't passed one of several funding bills, appropriations that fund the government. And without that, the government cannot spend money. And so this is why you're seeing, okay, well, why won't the national parks be open? Why won't this be open? It's because the government cannot spend money to have employees go out there. Now, there are certain exceptions to this. And I think someone mentioned earlier, well, what does it mean to be essential, right? And so there's some definitions about what are exceptions to this. And some of those are activities necessary to bring about the orderly termination of an agency's functions. Okay, so they've got to wind things down as well. They can spend money, they can have employees do that. Administration of a benefit payment provided through funds that remain available in absence of new appropriations. And so you can think of this as multi-year funds or indefinite appropriations. Think about military retirement payments, think about Social Security, disability payments. Those types of things have an appropriation that doesn't, it's not just a year-long appropriation. And there's plenty more out there. Those are just some examples. Activities and purchases financed with prior year funds and ongoing activities which has already been obligated. So for example, if you have a firm fixed price contract and funds have already been obligated to that contract, that is something that can continue to go on. However, a big caveat is if that's performed on a government installation and the government is closed, you can't access that installation or that building, whatever it might be, then you have an issue, right? So even though there could be funding there, you still might not be able to do it. And that's why it's important to communicate and document. And you're going to keep hearing me say that today. Communicate and document. As Dave said at the beginning of this, you got to be communicating with the CO to find out, hey, how much money has already been obligated to my contract? When does that run out? You have got to ask those questions to the CO, and then you need to document it. You might have a phone call with the CO, right? Follow that up with an email saying, as discussed, you told me X, Y, or Z about when the funding is going to run out. You told me that you expect to send a stop work order on X date, right? Something that, so you want to document, communicate, and document. Next is something that's constitutional under the authority of the president, activities relating to emergencies involving the safety of human life or the protection of property. And that's where you're going to find the DoD contracts really using that exception. And that is in section 1342 of the Anti-Deficiency Act, but that's where you're going to see the DoD doing a lot of their justification for keeping contracts open and spending money.
So,
go ahead.
So, you mentioned there's a whole lot there for folks that are doing DoD contracts. Does that mean it will continue, or you don't know yet?
We don't know. And every contract, of course, every contract is different, right? So what your contract is allowing, and for example, if you have a contract that has an option year coming up and say a couple of days, well, that might be considered a new start to exercise that option year. And the government may not exercise that, may delay the exercise of that option. So there's a lot, and that's why it's important to go back to your contracting officer today, because will they show up to work on Monday? We don't know. But
and it's a weekend too. So we have a whole lot of stuff that's kind of whipping around right now. That's why we wanted to do this right now. So right this minute, if you're listening and you have a contract right now, you should be typing an email to your contracting officer. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's right. You should be getting advice from your contracting officer about what is going to happen in your particular contract. You want to ask, is there funds still obligated to the contract? When would those funds expire? If it's a cost reimbursable contract, how much of those funds are still remaining before it runs out? It might just be, a small amount where your employees might be able to do a little bit on Monday to help wrap things up and kind of do some winding down. Or it could be, hey, you've got a few more weeks that you can have here. Sometimes a contracting officer will have a pot of money that they work with, and they might ask you to accelerate your performance, right? And this comes back to that documentation concern. If you get a stop work order, if there is something the contracting officer asks you to do that increase your cost of performance, you may be able to submit for an equitable adjustment to capture those costs. However, having those costs documented is the most important thing to do here, so you can actually prove up those costs later. The one thing I would say is, if you can, in your accounting system, if you can open up a new category and have that be, hey, contract, government shutdown, wind down costs, costs of, dealing with your employees, wind up costs, or when the performance starts back up again. Those are the kind of things that you want to document, so you can keep all that separate from every other line item you have in your accounting system. So it's easy for you to retrieve when it's time to submit for an equitable adjustment.
And what are the chances that they'll accept the equitable adjustment?
Well, again, it depends on what's in the contract. Now, most contracts are going to have a stop work provision. It's under FAR 52-242 something -15, I believe. And so you should check your contract to see if that's in there. If that's in there, the contracting officer may invoke that and say, hey, here's a stop work order. That will give you instructions. And if you look at that FAR provision, it actually tells you that an equitable adjustment is available. But you got to make sure the costs that you have are allocable or allowable and allowable to your contract. The other thing is when you're doing so, the government's going to anticipate that you mitigate your damages. So you can't, potentially if this shutdown lasts for a while, you may have to consider reducing employee hours, laying employees off, furloughing employees as a cost-saving measure to the government. If you can't find other work for them to do, you can't put them on training, you can't ask them, they don't have any, for example, leave to take. Those are some of the things that you're going to have to start considering. And those are very, very kind of specific issues that if you are, work with your HR folks, work with whoever you have that's administering that. But if you have specific legal questions about how does it impact, the FLSA, the Davis-Bacon Act, the Service Contract Act, for example, there can be a union involved, and how is that going to affect your union, the National Labor Relations Board, right? So there's a few things, like if you have questions about how dealing with your employees is going to impact the employee's rights and how that might affect your business going on, that's something you should probably maybe reach out to a counsel or trusted advisor to get some particular advice on.
I couldn't agree more of that. So who bears the risk in this situation? I know the government does a really good job of like saying, hey, we can terminate for whatever, right? So, and the fact that they can shut down, who really is bearing the risk on this?
So, I think the practical answer is the contractors bear a lot of risk here. Now, the government will try to make you whole at the end, but you have to weather this storm. And that's really the issue, right? Is getting through the storm and then waiting for the government to finally come around and bring its apparatus back up. It could take a while, as Peter mentioned earlier, for those payments to start flowing again. And even missing a couple of payments for a small business, I mean, that could really put you in financial dire straits.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes the government's going to say you have to continue performing, and they may not be able to pay you immediately. So there is some real risk there on the contractor. Now, the government rarely would terminate a contract for convenience due to a government shutdown, but there's also something that everyone needs to be aware of. That in your contracts, you probably have something that deals with disputes. There's a disputes clause, right? And most contracts are going to have them. If the government breaches its contract, i.e. by not paying you, that is considered a dispute. And in that disputes clause, it says you must continue to perform during the pendency of that dispute. And people can get in trouble if they voluntarily cease performance, even though the government hasn't issued a stop work order, right? So if you're in a situation where you're thinking, I just can't take it anymore, I need to stop operations, and you haven't gotten a word from your contracting officer that there's a stop work order in place, please, please, please reach out to counsel, trusted advisor, and get some information on that, because you could set yourself up for getting terminated for default, which will greatly affect your ability to get federal business in the future. That'll
kill your CPARs for sure. So
yes.
Because this is really important. I didn't know, because I thought that, sometimes they say, hey, when you get if you get a stop work order, then you should stop, is what you're saying? I mean, that's a stop, right?
Yeah, that's a stop. And that's going to have instructions. The CO is going to give you instructions. And hopefully you have subcontracts that have flow down provisions of your federal contract, or if you're a subcontractor, check your subcontract to see what has been flowed down, because sometimes a termination for convenience option is available. Sometimes there's a stop work option in these subcontracts, and you want to flow that down to your subs and first, second tier subs and beyond, to make sure that they know what's going on as well. But typically what happens in a stop work situation, the CO will say, hey, you're going to give you a notice, it should be in writing, you're going to stop work, and I'll tell you the instructions when you're supposed to wind down, what you're supposed to stop. It can be partial or it can be all. So again, each one of those is going to be a little different. And then that's why, again, it's important to communicate now with your CO to kind of see, hey, do you anticipate issuing a stop work order, during the pendency of this shutdown? that's something that would be good to know, because maybe the contracting officer doesn't think so yet, but maybe, well, if it goes on a couple of weeks, we might have to consider that. So just things to think about when you're communicating with the CO. And again, communicate and document.
So if you don't get a stop work order, then that means continue, correct?
Under certain contracts, right? So firm fixed price, cost
It takes a
reimbursable.
lawyer's answer
I
to
mean,
answer.
yes, of course, right? I wish I could say there's a one size fit all here or some sort of bright line rule, but again, with every contract being different, there are different circumstances and different situations. Firm fixed price contract where you can perform off a government installation, and there's nothing from federal employees impacting your performance. Like, you don't need instruction, you don't need any type of RFI from a government employee. You should continue working there. Now, again, if you get the stop work order, don't do it. If you're talking with your CO and the CO says, hey, well, we've only obligated funds through October 15th on this contract, that's all we have available right now, then don't go beyond the appropriation. But again, continue to talk to your contracting officer. Sometimes you may want to even ask for a stop work order. If you know there's going to be issues, you can ask the CO to say, can you just issue us a stop work order here? And then we can figure things out once the government decides to reopen, once there's appropriations again.
Because it can be brutally expensive sometimes, right?
Yes, it really can be. It really can be. And that's something that each individual business and each with a particular contract needs to make. It's kind of a case-by-case situation. But for example, let's say you have a cost reimbursable contract and there's only funds for, $10,000 more of work. Well, how many hours can your employees work under that? Right. So again, something to talk with the CO about to see, like, hey, what should we do here? What does the government want us to do here?
Interesting. So Jeff is asking, does this affect WMATA? And that's kind of one of those pseudo agencies, right? Is that right, Jeff? Like, it's kind of federal. It's like it's a power.
Yeah, it's
a power or something, right?
That's like a metro, right? That's the.
Oh, is it?
WMATA, is that buses? And I don't
know. I thought of
metro. Yeah.
So there. I don't know that we know the answer to that. And then Jennifer's asking if and when the Corps gives you a stop work order and you have a large equipment on site that needs to be removed due to rentals, who pays the extra associated cost for the stop work order? Man,
that's a great question. So when you have that stop work order, okay, this goes back to that documentation concern. You have to wind down and you should mitigate your costs. So obviously it's not in the government's interest to have you keep this equipment on site at whatever cost, for the rental costs until the shutdown ends. It's probably better for you to mitigate, from the government's perspective, for you to mitigate your costs, i.e. take the rental equipment, move it, turn it back in, save those costs. But the cost that you have in complying with that, keep that documented as a separate item, right? That way you can come back and ask for an equitable adjustment. Hey, we did this in order to mitigate our costs in accordance with the stop work order that you issued. We're asking, for this, whatever amount of money that it happens to be, to recover that cost, since it increased our cost of performance.
So if I can summarize this: document, communicate, and don't assume anything.
Yes.
There you go, man. 3 bullet points. I didn't even put those on the slide. All right. So, So Peter, you mentioned this as well. So what do you remember from 2013 and 2018? We know that contractors wind up taking a hit, like Jason said, especially if you didn't document or communicate effectively, right, Jason?
Correct.
Yeah. You're going to take a hit if you don't communicate and document. But so what do you remember? This is what I remember. I remember contractors taking a hit in both scenarios. Funding was ultimately restored. Spending went up later, and all federal pay and employees got paid. Now, some contractors did recoup some of those costs as well. So what do you remember, Peter?
Well, to echo what Jason has just said, I think two of the most important things that a contractor can do right now is that email out to your contracting officer. If you haven't already done it, that's very important that you do it. And as he suggested, another line item, you must document everything on the cost related to the shutdown on that contract. Very, very important. So I think in what is probably going to happen when they do resolve this, there'll be a continuing resolution, and maybe Jason can discuss this a little bit more. It'll either be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, because when you get jammed up this close, you're not going to approve a full budget. So this continuing resolution is going to take us out for a specific period of time, but you're going to be going through the same process leading up to that continuing resolution. What we told our clients, the same thing, document everything. If you've got a funded contract or appropriations, even though there's nobody there to accept your invoices or process your invoices, we're going to continue to fund those invoices and the payroll on those, our customers. So if you get into a dispute, the government can't come back and say, well, you weren't there, you didn't perform the work. So we say to all our customers, as long as it's funded and as long as there's appropriations, we're going to continue to fund. I would say to the people listening to this or anybody that we run into, even if you have existing financing with a bank, that's only going to go on for so long because banks have a borrowing-based certificate. So if your receivables are out over 90 days, they're not going to add to that certificate. With us, we don't have a 90-day limit. You've got invoices outstanding 120 days, 180 days. During this period, we're going to continue to provide you the liquidity and the access to capital to keep performing on those contracts. And so I say to everybody that we come into, there's no charges to get up and get ready with us. We can have you ready in 3 or 4 business days and set us up as a reserve funding for your company in case you may need it, even if there aren't a client of ours currently.
Yeah.
So we're going to be there to still provide that access to capital so you don't lose the contract for non-performance.
So when you did this back, and like you said, you've been through this a few times. Some of the folks that I've talked to, and you mentioned it can go out an extended period of time, not just because of what the shutdown does, right? So you have the shutdown, and then you have the ramp back up, and then you have, they're getting caught up on their invoices. Sometimes that can go out for a while. What was the longest you saw it go out, Peter?
Over 200 days.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute again. So I know that sounds discouraging a little bit, but we want you to know where you are, right, Jason? And we got Rafa here too. Rafael Marrero in the house. The doctor is in. You have anything else to throw in on what happened last time, Rafa, that you saw?
Well, it was, I remember the last time this happened, and a lot of, actually Jason, from a contractual standpoint, he covered most of the things that we would be looking for anyway. I remember that at the time, Mastech, I was actually on the Mastech side and working as a prime with some of our subs and the challenges they were having, right? So part of what we asked them, Dave, was just like when you have to document delay days and you want to prevent litigation when you go to court, especially if there's construction or any type of infrastructure being built, you want to document your environment. You want to take photographs. You want to have full accountability for delay days and the impact that it can have on your implementation schedule. Because if you're bound to a firm fixed price and you're bound to a fast track type of implementation, this is going to have an impact, right? If you reduce the amount of time you have to implement this scope and it's for the same price, then this part of the equation just became real narrow, right? So you're going to have a lot more risk on your side. I would highly advise to document everything, especially pictures of work in progress. If you're doing construction or infrastructure, if you're doing, if you can't complete an application, you may request additional time to complete, based on the implications that's going to have on your work, right? Because you have deliverables that you have to meet. That's very important. So document. Make sure you communicate well, set clear expectations with your team, and whatever you do, look at your bottom line and try to make any cuts that any unnecessary overhead. I'm not talking about personnel, any unnecessary overhead. Now's the time to look at your budget.
Great advice. So you mentioned you were with Mastech at the time. You had a
Yes.
bunch of subs that were under you too. How did you manage the relationship with your subs?
Well, a lot of it was communication, and a lot of it was traveling to the field, right? I would do surprise inspections. When I had contractors telling me that they were actually working at a job site, I'm in Miami in a penthouse in Coral Gables, right at the corporate headquarters, and not drinking pina coladas, but close, right? So next thing you know, Rafa's on a plane out to Wyoming, and we're showing up at a macro cell site. And I'm calling the vendor, say, hey, how's it going? And I'm at this job site, and he's telling me, well, we're here right now. We're digging trenches. No, you're not, right? So inspect what you expect is the big rule, right? You need to document everything, have clear communication, and manage clearly by expectations and deliverables. That's very important. During these times, I think we always had like a regular communications meeting with our vendors, right? So have those, so that you can align on the core principles and keep people updated, right?
Yeah.
Good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah. It's not always good news. It's not good news, but
Exactly. You should always say, hey, look, we're monitoring the situation. Even if there's nothing significant to report, right? Tell them that, right? We've been in touch with this. We've been in touch with this person. Document all of your interactions to show a document of log them in a communications document, right? Very important. The last thing you want is for your subcontractors to feel that you're just giving them, the business, if you will, right?
Mhm.
Very important.
Good advice. Anything you want to throw in on that, Jason, on top of what Rafa just said?
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. And, there is something about discussing expectations. I mean, just think of your employees' morale, just that alone.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to be out there not knowing what's going to happen next. And, and so I think that's incredibly important. And yeah, I would just say, if you're doing wind down operations, I can't agree more. Taking pictures, sketches, documenting things, emails to your suppliers, your subcontractors, everything you can get to show what you did in order to comply with a stop work order, or if you don't get a stop work order, like if performance literally becomes impossible due to the government shutdown, those are going to be highly valuable documents if you have to go in front of through the claims process to the Armed Services Board or the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals, or the Court of Federal Claims.
Yep. All right. So Scott's asking, does the prime who has a contract with the USG have the responsibility to notify its subs of any stop work orders?
Yes. I think if you get a stop work order from the USG, you need to be communicating that down to your subs. And typically that stop work order is going to give instructions on that point, basically saying you have to stop, and you have to tell your subs to stop working. Mm-hmm. And your subs, like in the end, your subs can continue to work. However, the US government may not pay for that work. Because again, your contract with your sub doesn't have, as we say, a privity with the US government, right? It's run by state law, and depending on what's written in that subcontract, that can govern how that relationship goes. Now, I think most people in this situation can understand, hey, there's a government shutdown. What do you want me to do? But if you have a sub that's, not very friendly, I guess, there could be issues there. And of course, if it boils over into something bigger than just a short disagreement, again, we're available here to take a look at that subcontract and let you know what your rights are and what your responsibilities are under your subcontract.
Yep. And I love this one too. Was somebody else going to throw in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, sorry about that, Dave. Just to add to, in keeping with what Jason just said, you know, if you've got people mobilized, right, there's mobilization and demobilization costs, right? If you have manpower out there and they are lodging somewhere, there's overhead, right? There's per diems, there's meals, there's miles. If you need to demob those people, or if you're going to keep them there, you're assuming risk, right? So you need a risk management plan to mitigate that, because, you know, what if the government takes forever? Or then you're saying, well, wait a minute, is it best to just keep them there on standby rather than demobbing them and moving all the equipment? I'm just throwing that out there because I know that's a factor, right? People do work in white space outside of their major where their home base is, and during those times you should seriously be addressing that. So if you've got IT personnel, for example, not necessarily in construction, but they're in some city and they're lodging somewhere, guess what? You have to make a decision. Am I going to demob them? What's going to be the cost benefit of maintaining them there? And if so, can I absorb that? Am I going to get reimbursed? That's where you need to call a gentleman like Jason, right? To look at the T's and C's and flow down provisions. And that's why it's important to negotiate some of these things ahead of time, right?
What'd you
Jason,
got there, Peter?
Yeah, I was going to ask Jason, if a client does get, or a company gets a stop work order and they decide to furlough employees, it's my understanding that they would qualify for unemployment benefits. Is that accurate?
That's generally accurate. I mean, whether you furlough, which is typically considered a temporary type of layoff, or a complete layoff, typically employees are going to be able to access unemployment.
Okay.
Good. All right. So from Anonymous here, somebody's just saying. All right. If program office says they have funds till October 6th, while the contracting office says the contract's fully funded until the next option period, which is a few months away, do we go with the word from the contracting office or the program office? Ooh, that's a Jason question for sure.
Typically, it's the contracting officer that has the real authority when dealing with government contracts. However, I would bring that up to the contracting officer, and I'd get all those people on one email to get things sorted out.
Yeah.
Because you don't want, to have, I hate to say it this way, but mommy and daddy games. Just get, hey, let's be clear here. What is this? What does this actually mean? Right. And if the CO says no, continue to perform, well, that's what the CO says. But I would get all three, the program office, the CO, and yourself in one email chain and basically try to hash that out, because the CO shouldn't be telling you to do work in advance of an appropriation, because that would be an Anti-Deficiency Act violation on behalf of the CO. It happens. It's probably going to happen during this shutdown. There's a process to ratify that. Most people, again, there's a whole bunch of stuff on that, but yes, if you're getting direction from the CO, I think it's a least riskier option to follow what the CO says, because the CO is typically the one that's responsible for the administration of the contract.
That is an awesome answer. And I don't know who asked that question. That is a money question.
Anonymous.
Thank you.
That was anonymous.
That was anonymous.
Yeah.
Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous, we thank you for that one, because that is a winner. So we have some questions from Eduardo about interest rates. You're going to have to talk to Peter directly on that. I'm going to let you talk to Peter. And then if you do have delayed payments, can you get interest paid by the government for those?
So I can speak to that, Dave. Generally speaking, interest that you pay on loans is not reimbursable by the government. I can't remember the provisions of the CAS that talk about this, which is the contract accounting standards, but it's in there. However, most contracts have what they call the Prompt Payment Act language in there. And the Prompt Payment Act says if the government doesn't pay you promptly, typically 30 days, then you start accruing interest. You can go, I think there's a Treasury website, has a Prompt Payment Act calculator on there, and the rate is dependent on the inflation rate. So it's actually not like just a dribble right now. It's okay money. So you can see, and then you can look at, hey, the cost to finance that it's going to cost you to finance. And then, hey, what will I get back from the government as an additional payment under the Prompt Payment Act?
That was awesome. Man, I love this stuff. I'm learning a lot. I don't know about the rest of
Three-pointer.
you.
That was a three-pointer, yeah.
Yeah, that's a one. All right. So are there concerns for grants, or are they safe as they are funded, appropriated annually, perhaps with exception to obtaining government approval for new awards? Great question. Sean Fitzpatrick. Any thoughts on that? Are grants kind of right because they're not like immediate? They usually run a year behind, right?
So I would get with whoever's administering that grant and ask them in your particular circumstance what is available. It's possible that there's some sort of multi-year appropriation there, or that it's funded without appropriations. You know, some agencies like the United States Patent and Trade Office, they don't have everything that, not everything they do is appropriated. So they might continue to still work, but other grants, other agencies that give you grants may get those grants through non-appropriated sources, and therefore would not be paused. So it's something to ask that whatever government employee is administering that grant, to make sure you're getting it straight from the Govy that is administering it.
So panelists, I just wanted you to see Kamalia's lovely, very kind comment. Gosh, more people need to be on this to hear this content. This is gold. What a nice comment. Just want to make sure you saw that.
We love that. I love Sally for saying it for somebody else. That's awesome. And that's why we're doing this. We're doing this for you guys. So here we go. What about firm fixed price contracts? Do we continue to bill? That's from Divya or Divya. Not sure how to say that. Any thoughts on that?
So I guess my thought on it is, one, verify, i.e. communicate with the CO to see what funding is actually available. And then two, yes, you're going to work there. And then, yes, you still invoice. And I think Peter mentioned this. I think even Raphael mentioned this as well. You may invoice, and if there's nobody on the other end to push the accept button on WAF, right, or whatever, contracting system they're using, payment system, you may have a delayed invoice, right? But yeah, you still go through that.
Yeah, I would. When in doubt, bill. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right, fantastic. Okay, we got through those. So let's talk about what's happening a little bit. Like federal agencies now, they're in various places because they do different things, like Jason said. Some of those are going to be ramping down their services. Some of those are going to be maintaining those services, depending on what they do. DOD being one of those that you said, Jason, right? So from a federal agency standpoint, the reason I'm asking this, and the reason I want folks to take a look, is if we take a minute and come out of our contracting shoes and go into what the government is doing and the burden that's being placed on them, because they didn't cause the problem. You didn't cause it. I didn't cause a problem. None of us caused a problem. We can talk about who's responsible and whether or not we're not going to get political here. We're just going to get straight out. What is happening in the bureaucratic components of the federal agencies right now? Anybody want to throw in on that? Because I'm not a Govy. I don't know for sure. What do you see happening? Anybody know? In the different agencies? Jason, you used to at least be in one of the agencies.
Yeah. So I was in the Army and obviously had lived through a few shutdowns. I was active duty military, so a little bit different. But I think this goes to, some questions we had about, hey, what is essential? What does it mean to be essential? And it goes back to that exception of protecting life or saving or protecting property. And so the DOD, even within the DOD, there's going to be a certain number of folks that, for example, a lot of civilian employees might say, well, you're not essential to stick around here. But again, that's going to be typically done on a case-by-case basis. So right now, agencies are going through that. They're opening up their government shutdown playbook and saying, okay, what did we do last time? And okay, who's essential now? Has that changed? And if it hasn't changed, okay, here's what we're preparing to do. I was just talking to some buddies of mine are in the Department of Justice. I mean, prosecuting cases as assistant U.S. attorneys. And I asked, well, how is it going to affect you? It's like, yeah, they won't get paid. They're still going to show up to work, but they're not going to get paid until the shutdown's over. So you still might see that from a lot of government employees, that they will go into the office, they will continue to work, but they're not going to get paid. And if we recall from I think the last shutdown, it was really the air traffic controllers and TSA employees that brought things down, that brought the end to the shutdown, because air traffic wasn't happening and people were complaining a lot, and it's about around the holidays, and so folks were like, hey, this really has to stop. But those employees, the air traffic controllers and the TSA employees, were showing up without pay and doing work. And then what happened is a lot of people ended up calling in sick because they just got fed up with not getting paid for coming into work. So
I don't understand. Why do you want to get paid for coming into work?
Right. Yeah.
Man, these freaking federal employees want everything, I think.
So I think that's what the federal agencies are doing. They're dusting off their playbooks from last time, and they're going to typically follow the same thing. So I think you can probably, I think each agency typically will send out guidance. Whether or not they make that guidance public is a different story, but I'm sure that news agencies are probably picking up on that, and you can see, or you can go to the agency's website and see if there's anything there. OMB might publish some guidance to all federal employees. So you'll see some guidance coming out about that. Buyers and contracting officers, I think, it's the next line there. So the COs, I mean, they're trying to manage this as best as anyone else. This is also tough for them. They're government employees. They may be not getting paid. They may get furloughed, and they're trying to keep, trying to organize this chaos, knowing that if you think about it, if everyone is getting a stop work order or has to make an independent decision about whether or not the contract's going to continue, that CO is involved in that decision. And then if things start ramping back up, the CO's got to make sure everything else gets turned on. And then when all these equitable adjustments start flowing in, that CO is the one that's primarily going to be taking a look at that. So with that in mind, as we've been discussing this entire time, having these communications now is important, because if you're communicating with the CO is not going to be surprised if you're appropriately documenting everything and segregating out your costs when you submit that equitable adjustment or any additional costs that have come in. The CO is going to be happy to take a look at that and be like, oh, this actually makes sense. This is something I can easily pay. Because remember, that CO also has bosses, and that they need to ensure that their bosses are comfortable with paying these additional funds. If you make the CO's job easy, it makes everyone's job easy. So, but also, contracts that are not out there right now, they're going to be paused, right? You can't have a new start. That's kind of like a term of art here, but a new start, meaning spending a new money until an appropriation's in place. And if there's a continuing resolution, new starts also aren't available, because you're only allowed to continue what you've already been doing. And so this can impact whether there's a new contract coming, whether the DoD is trying to buy a new weapon system or do additional research. You can't start that stuff, right? So again, those are some of the things going on there.
So
yeah,
I do there's a couple questions about specific projects and whether they're going to be funded. I would reach out to your contracting officer, and with whether a particular agency is what the playbook says, we don't know, and they may have changed it. So I would wait for the advice from those agencies. You mentioned just obviously the documentation is so critical. And I think if anybody walks away from this today, is just, hey, document everything, communicate with the contracting officer. I want to, and I'm going to build on this in a few minutes personally about some of the things that happened after the last couple of sessions. Everybody is affected in different ways, and contracting officers, obviously, it increases their workload dramatically when this happens. So being able to help make their job easier is one thing, but also the human factor of asking how that affects them, right? So we can be affected. Our employee morale can be affected. Our businesses can be affected negatively. It's the same thing for your contracting officers, your program people. The uncertainty is palpable at these times, right, guys? So when if we just remember that we're talking with human beings at times like this, to be able to help, and just having some compassion and empathy because we're not in their shoes. I'm telling you, they'd fire me like that if I was in the government. There's no way I would survive. I can't do it. The paperwork alone would kill me. So I just want to say that, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But I do want to get to, and we'll get to some questions. If you have any questions, pop it in the Q&A, just because I can't check all the chat while we're doing this. So what can we do right now? Now, I'm going to focus on a little bit on Peter, because it's times like this that, irrespective of whatever we've done with our financial stability, this is a pothole that we have got to be able to have some alternative resources for. If it's 5 days, that's one thing. If it's 34 days like it was last time, that's another thing, because once you tie on the 34 days and the catch up, you better have the ability to weather the storm. Who said the weathering the storm earlier? I think that was really brilliant, of weathering the storm. That was really good. Was that you, Peter?
It was Raphael.
Raphael? Yeah.
Dr. Moraro. I feel like
Doctor.
it came from.
It takes a doctor to say such smart
I
things.
feel like it came from the good doctor.
But weathering the storm. What can we do right now to weather the storm? Peter has a lot of experience in this, and because you know how the government works. Banks, I'm telling you, if there's anything that I know from the past, banks don't understand this world nearly like they should, especially in impactful times like this. What can people do right now to secure some additional funds? What, or at least have the cushion? What should they do?
What they should do is attempt to get signed up with us immediately. We can get you signed up very, very quickly. And since we don't charge any upfront costs, there's no cost to following through with this. So you can get set up with us. And if you need us and you have those funded contracts or appropriation, we'll fund your work during the stoppage. At the end of the stoppage, if you don't need us anymore, you go on and continue on. But we can be a stopgap for you. Most of our clients, it's funny, a lot of clients will come on under that scenario and they never leave us because of the level of service and lending to the opportunity. And you got to understand, I've been doing this for 33 years. We understand government contracts. So we've got a lot of experience in funding government contractors. So it's very easy to get up and running with us. We'll be there if you need us. If you don't, we'll be a stopgap. You know, I heard a statistic the other day, out of the last 40 years, the budget has been approved. You know how many times on time?
What?
4 times.
4. I was gonna say it's gotta be one hand.
4 times out of the last 40 years, because we get into the continuing resolution. Well, my understanding is there's 13, is it at 13, Jason? Appropriation bills?
Yeah, I think there's
Is it 13?
13 separate bills, and sometimes it's passed as an omnibus bill.
Yeah. So, you know, to get them all together to pass 13 bills is a tremendous task. So, you know, we're going through this, and someone had mentioned that this is liquid gold or this is gold. You're right, it's gold, because this is the norm. This is the norm, and you have to be prepared for this. Continuing resolution, we could be back into the same boat in 30, 45, 60, 120 days. So this is great information, and quite frankly, every government contractor should be listening to this conversation. That's how powerful it is. But it's easy to onboard with us. It's easy to offboard. We'll be there to support you and give you the access, because you've got to perform on the contracts that are funded and appropriated. You must perform on those contracts.
So did you see Jay's post who said FWIW House just failed to pass a stopgap measure, shutdown looks more imminent as of just now. Thanks, Jay, for that real time, up to the moment, and from Partner Intel.
Yeah, we appreciate that great news you got there, Jay Bartlett.
And thanks, Jay.
Yeah, thanks. We do appreciate that. So I will ask this, because I want to make sure that if you do need this, you get it and you get to Peter. I hate this stuff. I hate having to talk about this. I want to talk about what we're going to be talking about in a minute. But I do want you to be able to gain access to what you need and get to Peter. And I don't know anybody else that does it like he does. I've known him for, how long has I known you? About 6 years now, Peter?
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
Nobody does it like we do it.
No, that's a fact. And it would always came down to who understands federal contracting. And I went to the banks because I wanted to team up with banks. When I started ISI Federal in 2009, I'm like, one of the major pillars for being able to be a federal contractor is to have funding. And I would go to the banks and they're like, I don't know how that stuff works. And I live in Maryland. I don't live in freaking Wyoming. I live in Maryland. You would think that we would have banks that understand it. And there are a few that do better than others, granted. But there's a lot of times if you're a small company, you win let's say you're $1 million company, you win a $10 million contract, banks are going to look like you're nuts that if you want me to fund that. But I think that's where you shine, don't you, Peter?
Yeah, not only that, but we also fund new companies, and I have a lot of companies, joint ventures with two government contractors will get together to form a joint venture. They both have historical data, but the joint venture has got no historical data, and we fund brand new joint ventures.
That's
so
awesome.
We lend to the opportunity, which is very, very powerful.
It is a powerful thing. So I will make sure if you fill this out, you're going to talk to Peter, I'm certain. So while you're filling that out, anybody else got any little stragglers? We'll shut that down in a minute. So what can we do now, right now, and start, and as we're planning for this, to position our companies after the shutdown? So there's two times that I've lived personally through shutdowns when I was doing representation for people just like you. And I can tell you that if just taking some simple steps, you can win and you can actually expand in these instances. So first things first, something that Jason said earlier, and I think Peter alluded to it as well, is that if you don't have the wherewithal to finish and you can't make it after that, that means you're going to stop a contract, which means you're going to default, right, Jason?
Yes. Yeah.
And if you default, that's going to wipe out that contract and potentially any future contracts that you would be able to compete for, right?
Essentially a bad CPARs and some, will definitely hurt. And then obviously some questions you get asked in for a particular government contracts acts, have you ever defaulted? And so again, if you have that, it's really a black stain. And so you want to obviously try to avoid that or mitigate it as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So again, that goes back to communication. If you feel like you're going there, don't preemptively say, I can't do this, I'm not going to do it. Tell them that you're struggling, because if you say in particular words that you're not going to perform, that can be seen as what we call a repudiation. Mm-hmm. And that means that a government can act on that as well. So again.
And my point is this, everybody here is not going to do that. Did everybody get that message? Do not do that. Whoever is not here, and we got what? I don't know, 109 people, right? There's thousands of companies, and there's your competitors that are out there that may do exactly what Jason said. I'm not going to do it anymore. I can't do it. I can't afford it. I'm shutting it down. And they may even shut their whole entire business down too, right? They could not be financially viable enough to survive. That leaves a vacuum in the space for us, for you. So I'm going to say this real careful. Anybody that's on the edge about being in federal contracting said, this stuff blows my mind and makes me all kind of nervous. Your competition wants you to leave. Your competition wants you to give up and say, this is not worth it. I'm telling you, there's billions of dollars. once you understand this world, right? And anybody would tell me that I'm wrong. There's billions to be made in this place.
Mhm.
And what I want to do is encourage everybody. Don't make sure you have the financial wherewithal to make it through. That's the first thing. If you have contracts, and if you don't have contracts yet, that's okay. Because if you don't have contracts, okay, you can positively still succeed in this place. And I want to give it for everybody to see. We have 40 hours from now, almost exactly 40 hours, 40 hours minus 1 minute. And you might be saying, but Dave, that's not right. Yes, it is right, because we'll run until 5:59 Eastern Daylight Time right now on October 1st, because they can book things through Hawaiian time. We have 4 hours, 40 hours left. Don't lose sight of that. Make sure you're paying attention to SAM.gov and GSA eBuy if you have a GSA contract. You're going to see things come in fast. Make sure you're forwarding your phones and keeping your phones on. If you have a VoIP system, make sure it goes to everybody. Forward your emails and watch those emails. Make sure if you have like GSA at ABC Company coming in, make sure it's forwarded to your whole team, because you don't want to miss anything. And they're working on Saturday. I guarantee you, the contracting officers are going to be working tomorrow. They're gonna. And make sure you're checking your junk emails. So those are the things to be able to do today and tomorrow. Now, I'm going to point this out, that if you're not sure if you can catch everything on SAM.gov, sign up for SAM Radar, and we'll make sure you get that turned on so you get them immediately, everything that you're searching for. All right. Here's the other part that I want everybody to know. The numbers are going to look, this is last year's numbers. It's actually $1.7 trillion this year. So the past 2 years, remember, we had a shutdown in 2018.
Mhm.
Look at the number in 2018, 550 billion. 1.6 trillion last year, 1.7 trillion this year. Now, I know we went through COVID and all the craziness that we did, but we're coming out of, do not lose sight of the fact that the government is going to spend billions of dollars, and they're going to be buying from somebody. Might as well be you. Very important. This is the latest data. 74% only have one response. 86% only have 5 or fewer responses, and almost nothing shows up on SAM.gov, which is why we built this. So if you're interested in that, you can check it out. It's a 98% that doesn't hit SAM.gov. October 1st, I don't care if we're shut down or not, part of your process for planning in the future so that you can maximize this entire workspace. Make sure that you're paying attention to that. And I'm going to get you guys out in here in just a minute. I also want to say that the last time when there was a shutdown, it's a great time to be able to build relationships with people. Simply ask the question, how did it affect you? How you doing? They may dump on you and say, this place is an absolute crazy, all the government, all the Republicans, all the Democrats, whatever they say, just take it. And then if I can just paint the picture for you, we made millions of dollars with this. And that is say, hey, I didn't do it. I know you didn't create the problem. Nothing we can do about that. How about we concentrate on this contract right here? I'd love to help you with this, because that's something we can both pay attention to. We can both make positive change on. So we can take something that's entirely negative with a lot of energy. The reason why you're here, a lot of energy around the craziness, right, of a government shutdown. Same thing happened with them. And my team used to book meetings for me. We booked hundreds of meetings just by saying, hey, I just want to, see how you're doing. How about we get together? Just want to encourage you. And Jason, you're the rock star. Yesterday, we did a briefing on protests, and that will be available for on demand. Somebody asked that question earlier. So yes, that will be on GovBrief. But I just want to, I'll tell you, man, how many people love hearing what Jason had to say? And we'll get to some of your questions in just a minute. But we want to get you guys out of here because we want to keep this about an hour. So I really want to thank you, Jason.
No, you're welcome. And again, as you said earlier, this is to help people out, right? And
Yep.
absolutely, that's the most important right now.
Yep. Really do. And Peter, really appreciate you and your insight. And you've been through this with a lot of folks. Appreciate everything you've done. Rafa taking a back seat on this one because we'll talk about you coming up in 2024. But I really love your stories from Mastech.
Yeah.
And the subcontractors.
There's a lot that we can do for that we bring to the table because we've managed vendors our entire lives, right? So that's, I mean, a lot of the folks, maybe a lot of the people on this call right now are subcontractors themselves, right? And I spent a great portion of my professional career managing projects, managing programs, and managing resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in charge of vendor management and procurement, and so that's I know all too well the pains and troubles that people go through. So you need some advice, if you need someone to talk to regarding your plans for this upcoming year, we're here for you. Okay.
Love it. Appreciate you, man. We also had Sally White and here today. She was kind of sitting in the background, but she's a rock star in her own right. Really appreciate you, Sal.
Sure, and just wanted to say there's a lot of there were up to 100 and I think I counted 135 people
Yeah.
On the chat, and there's a lot of valuable information. Some of the people that we've shared among each other may be able to help us and connect us and make sure your LinkedIn page is up to date and your own brand and that type of thing. So feel free to save the chat if you want. Do you want me to tell them how, Dave? Or
I don't know that they can.
okay,
I think we have to distribute that. So,
okay, no worries.
So if you're interested in the chat, you can just say, "Hey, I want that chat," and we'll make sure. We'll probably send it to everybody here anyway. Might as well. Everybody's here. We're gonna send it to everybody, so everybody gets a copy. We'll send a recap out on that. A couple of folks that I do want to call out that weren't here today. They couldn't make it. DKA. They help with proposal writing. They're folks that if he could have been here, he would have been, but he couldn't. And Irene Morales helps with, she's actually kind of turning back into a govy again, I hear. So
no, but she's still doing a thing. She and her husband are running the firm. They've got all things that are certification related, and she's super sharp, knows the ins and outs of that. So give her a call. She's good.
Yeah, she's good. So we're all around. If you need any of that help, and my information's right here. And especially want to point you over to what doesn't hit sam.go, and you can find that on Sam Radar. So let's get to a couple questions here from Zach. You got a couple more minutes, Jason, that you can hang? Because I think some of these are going to require you.
Yeah, I can hang around.
All right. For time and materials contracts, if we're told to stop working but still have to pay employees, are the programs that reimburse the money that we have to pay out of pocket? Do we have to pay out of pocket, or is there a program to reimburse that money? I think it's both, right?
Yeah, so I think I would say that if you have employees and they're told, hey, you can't work on this contract, what you try to do there is have them work on something else, or have them, ask them if they'd rather take leave, or some type of vacation at this point. But yeah, they're your employees. You have to continue to pay your employees if they do any work. And that's really the issue here. And at some point, that's where this kind of issue comes to it. I guess what I'm trying to say is, at some point, if this shutdown lasts for a long time, the issues of, okay, I can't afford to keep these employees on is going to be a question that needs to be answered. Mm-hmm. And I hate to even bring that up, but it is true. And that's maybe where Peter's service can help you out in making sure you can continue to make payroll and keep those people on your payroll. But if it comes to a point where it's like, I just can't keep these employees, think about going to that furlough option. As again, Peter mentioned, typically you're going to have unemployment resources available for them. A furlough is a little bit different than a layoff, because a furlough still keeps them attached to like their fringe benefits, like healthcare plan, whereas a layoff completely severs the employment relationship. But yeah, if they're your employees, you've got to pay them, as you said, you're going to, in their employment contracts. They might be at-will employees. You might have contracts with them under the FLSA. They could be accepted or non-accepted. So there's a lot of employment considerations you have to consider there. But if you do keep some employees on because you don't know when the government's going to start back up, this goes back to that's documenting your costs. So that wind down, okay, I'm going to keep them on maybe at, a lower lower hours, whatever it might be to help weather the storm. But then at some point, if it's too much, you got to release some employees. There's a cost associated with that. There's a cost with bringing them back. There's a cost with, hey, some of these employees don't want to come back. You got to go out and recruit new employees. That's part of that kind of ramping back up costs. So those are some things that you want to keep documented so that when the government finally turns the money back on, you can go and say, hey, I need an equitable adjustment for these additional costs, or I need additional time to complete, this contract.
And I got a project that's been going since 21. We have about $100,000 that's been retained. The job is suspended. If the job is suspended, how would one approach, say, finance charges or monies not received due to the shutdown? I think we answered a lot of that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you're considering the cost of finance, right? That's something typically the government is not going to reimburse you for, but they do have. We talked about the Prompt Payment Act interest, so that's something that if the government owes you some money and they've owed it to you for a long time, and again, being retainage, it depends on when that is actually due to you. I don't know. Again, there's various reasons why the government may retain funds. But that's where you'll get any additional interest. And to kind of just put a finer point on that, the U.S. government doesn't pay interest because they have sovereign immunity, and unless they waive their sovereign immunity, they don't pay it. That's
what are the chances they're going to waive their sovereign immunity?
Well, but they don't, but they have, for example, in certain aspects, right? And that's the Prompt Payment Act. So the government says, all right. Well, if we don't pay you for a while, we'll kick you a little interest. That's essentially all that is. But that is a waiver of their sovereign immunity, a voluntary one, and it's narrowly construed. And so that's why you're seeing, like I mentioned earlier, there's some portion in the CAS, contracting accounting standards. I don't remember the exact provision, but if you search the FAR and or under the CAS, you'll probably find it. And there's case law on that issue that the government didn't waive sovereign immunity for that, so you can't pay it. There are some very, very narrow exceptions, though. And again, that would be an independent conversation we'd probably have to see if one of those exceptions would apply.
So Javier is saying, will VA hospital fully funded contracts be affected by the shutdown? Also, will the shutdown affect scheduled payments of invoices?
Potentially.
Yep.
I mean, that's a talk to your CO question on that.
Yeah.
And the VA is funded, sometimes with multi-year appropriations. So maybe they're not going to be as impacted, but potentially. And then even if the contract funds remain there, but particular VA employees are considered to be non-essential, and then they're furloughed and not showing up to work, is there going to be the appropriate government staff there to ensure payments are made? So there's a lot there. That's why having these communications or CO right now is the most important thing, because the CO can definitely answer that a lot better than I think anyone here on this panel.
So if funds have already been appropriated via approved PO, will the payment still be made to the vendor? And I would say maybe, but maybe
a lot of these, unfortunately, there's so much here that you have to give weaselly lawyer answers like it depends. And I hate doing that, right? But it's the truth.
Isn't that redundant?
Yeah. Potentially.
Boom.
He got me. All right.
Personal foul.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so many option years take effect 10/1. That's true, right? Because they did it last, so will the shutdown affect the new option year even after being renewed? And I can pretty much categorically say if it's new option year, Jason?
Yeah, it's going to be affected.
It's going to be affected.
Yeah.
So, we appreciate that. Any last minute questions? Let me just browse. Did Sally, did you leave? Sally left? All right. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to pop into the Q&A, let us know. Guys, I just want to say thank you for this, because literally yesterday afternoon was when we talked about this. And we got it out for everybody to be able to be here. The recording is going to be made available. We'll make sure you get a copy of that in the slides as well. But it, for short term, it just blesses the socks off of me that you guys are willing to do this, and just at a moment's notice. It is awesome of you guys to do this. And Christine says, thanks for this valuable information. You're welcome, Christine. I agree. Mark does have one question. I have a REA on a project from a year ago. I was told they would look at it fiscal year end September. Do I have any recourse if there's a shutdown? Wow, Mark. Anybody want to tell me what an REA is?
Request for equitable adjustment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You
There
should
we
know
go.
that, Dave.
I should know that. I just know. There you go. You're welcome, Jay Bartlett. Go ahead. For REA that was at year end in September. Man, why would they push off the REA to the year end? Why would they do that, Jason?
Oh, I can only count the ways. I mean, there's probably a plethora of reasons for doing so, but I will tell you, in the REA process, there is no stated required deadline that the agency has to respond by, right? And so sometimes you'll see this where they push it off, and they could do that for various reasons. Maybe they can't fund it with current year funds, and they need this upcoming FY24 funds to fund the REA. So there could be some reasoning behind that, but again, I don't want to speculate on why the agency did that in a particular circumstance. But for your REA, continue to communicate and ask questions to the CO about how that might affect your REA. And look, if the agency is kind of giving you the Heisman and just ignoring you on your REA, you have a recourse to file a claim, right, under the Contract Disputes Act. In the claim, the government does have to respond by a certain date. Sorry. So anyway, so on the REA piece, talk to your contracting officer. If you're getting, the sense that you're being ignored, consider a claim. If you are considering a claim, definitely you probably want to reach out to counsel, and of course,
lawyer up. Lawyer up right away. Because I'll tell you why, from an accounting standpoint, I know why they're doing it. It makes sense for them, but it's going to affect your bottom line and may put you in the red, right? To them, it makes sense to reconcile everything at the end of the year, right? And do the reconciliation at the end, and just I don't know if you've noticed, a lot of the payments that were deferred for COVID, for example, for the economic injury disaster loans, they're going to be reconciled at the end of the term of the loan, right? So not now, so that you can continue making your payments as scheduled, same amount, and then at the tail end, you owe a balloon payment. Well, the same applies to projects, right? They want to see how much contingency you have, how much reserve you have, and then they rather do it from that point at the end on the back end. It makes sense for them, but not for you. Lawyer up right away.
And if you need a lawyer,
just saying.
It
depends. There might be someone here.
It depends. That's right. I know. I gotta tell you guys. I'm so thankful for knowing each one of you, and for what you do for folks in this industry. It means a lot to me that you guys would take the time on such short notice to join for this, and to help the folks that are here. Everybody is saying that it was great.
This was good stuff. Yeah.
It was really good stuff. So if you need anything else, you got the information. We'll be shooting out a recap email with this. What's Jason's contact? Jason, pop your contact in there.
Yep, just
in the chat. We'll make sure you have that for everybody to have. And just really appreciate you guys. Peter, great job.
Thank you.
And it's times like this that your service is invaluable to
Yep.
people.
Yep.
All the rest of the time is really, really good. Don't get me wrong. But right now, right now it's your time to shine. And and if you don't have the cushion that you need, and even if you think you do, these kind of things just create all kind of havoc. But the other part is I just want to encourage everybody, stay up, stay in the batter's box. Don't let anybody bounce you out of that batter's box. Do not let any negativity take away what we can do together, because we do a lot of great things together. Would everybody agree with that?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Fantastic.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
All right, I will see you. And for those of you who are Sam Radar members, Monday morning we'll talk. We'll be talking about this Monday at 10 and 2. So thank you guys for joining us.